Well, welcome back to Face the Nation. David Sanger of the New York Times, David Rode of Reuters and The Atlantic are back with us. We're also joined by Wall Street Journal columnist Kimberly Strassel and our own John Dickerson. Kimberly, let me just start with you. You heard the analysis of the two Davids here. What's your take on this?
Well, they had mentioned that the intelligence officials think that this may buy us some time. I think the fear here, and this is the fear you're seeing expressed by the Israelis and others, is that this buys the Iranians some time, because this is what they have done in the past. In the past, whenever international anger grows, they suddenly come out, say they're willing to do some sort of negotiation. The sanctions come back down. This has allowed them to proceed with their program. And it seems to be happening again here too. They knew that they are facing increased new sanctions, another round of them here in Congress. So suddenly they look as though they're willing to do something with the hope that the United States stands down on that. It gives them the chance to get some relief, have some money again, and maybe restart some of their ambitions without, and then going forward we'll be able to continue at any time. They're still going to be enriching.
What's going to happen upon Congress, John? Because, I mean, you know, I see even before this agreement was finally reached, you had somebody like Chuck Schumer, who's one of the strongest administration backers, expressing some reservations.
That's right. The president met this week with senators in both parties saying, wait, just don't create new sanctions while I'm trying to work this thing out. The White House thinks that now they have about 6 months to work on this bigger deal. They think they'll be able to hold support together without new sanctions coming up. But it's not going to be easy. They're going to have some tending to do. You know, one thing that strikes me, Bob, is we look at this president and how he's pinned down on the domestic front. But presidents still have power. When you look at what he did this week, there's a security deal with Afghanistan. One of the promises in 2008 that Senator Obama made is he'd get us out of those two wars. And he also promised that he would negotiate with Iran and some of America's enemies. And so we're seeing that come to fruition as well. So even though the president's taking some pounding on the domestic front, he is still having an influence that goes all the way back to the things he said in his campaign in 2008.
David, do you think that this, you know, we heard Steny Hoyer and Kevin McCarthy, both the House has already passed stiffer sanctions. Mr. Hoyer is saying that he would like to see the Senate go ahead and do this, but, you know, put in a proviso there that they won't go into effect for 6 months. Do you think it'll be that easy?
I don't think it'll be that easy, but I suspect in the end they'll probably let the president play out his gamble. And the gamble is exactly what Kim and John were discussing. The two options here, Bob, are to relax the sanctions a bit and hope that it creates enough of a hunger inside Iran that there's an appetite for more sanctions relief, which they're only going to get by dismantling part of the system, versus the approach that you see Prime Minister Netanyahu urging, which is raise the sanctions and just hope that Iran's going to crumble and give up the whole program. I think that's a really, tough gamble for the president either way. He's making the bet that he can push along this sort of reform movement. Now, if he's wrong, then it's going to be very easy to put more sanctions on. If he's right, I think his problem in Congress is going to be getting the vote, particularly before the midterm elections, to get people to take sanctions away. That's pretty difficult.
David, there's no question that this administration looking for some good news. But with Netanyahu coming out so strongly against this, how do you see that playing out in this country? Because the Israelis, when they have a mind to, can generate a little opposition. They can do a pretty good job of lobbying.
I think it's a real issue for the administration. It's unusual here. The president and Netanyahu have always had a bad relationship. When Kerry took this job, he played up the fact that he had this good relationship with Netanyahu, and that is not making any difference at this point. So they're going to have a real problem selling this deal. Kerry's, I think in some way deserves some praise. He's brought some risk-taking to this administration. He's taken more risk than Hillary Clinton. What I've seen is that sort of giving up his dream of becoming president has actually maybe potentially made him a better Secretary of State. He's got something very rare in a calculating and cautious Washington. He's really got nothing to lose politically at this point, but he's got to deliver. This has to deliver an actual deal, or it's not going to really, he won't be delivering on the promise of diplomacy.
Because the Israeli argument here, which is a very powerful one, is that the only reason the Iranians have felt willing to have this as discussion is because the sanctions regime has built up to such that the pressure is huge. You take any of that away, even a small, I mean, Kerry was trying to suggest this is just a small diminution of the sanctions regime, but you take that away in any way, do they still feel obliged to continue doing anything? And that has been the argument against. The argument has been, if you're going to cease your nuclear program, then you should do it immediately and without any preconditions.
And there's a question about what's going on inside Iran. There's a very strong hard line there. The Revolutionary Guard that wants no part of this deal, and they want to go nuclear. Is Rouhani, and Zarif, do they really represent a genuine liberal movement? Can Obama help the moderates in Iran?
Part of this, Bob, is a question of what your ultimate end game is. So for President Obama, we've heard him say, and he said again last night, that his end game is to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The Israeli, the Saudi, the Arab end game's a little bit different. They don't even want Iran to have a nuclear capability, the ability to actually go up and just be a few screwdriver turns away from this. And that's why, if you're Obama, this preliminary deal is a pretty good deal. And if you're Israel or the Arab states, it doesn't do anything to get at that capability, and it might enshrine that capability.
How far are, say, the Saudis from having a nuclear weapon?
We don't think they've got a nuclear weapons program, but they underwrote the Pakistani program, which was put together by A.Q. Khan more than a decade ago. And there's always been an assumption that if they ever needed a weapon, they could make a deal with the Pakistanis to get one. Now you can imagine.
What would they do? They just buy it?
They've already paid for it under that theory, and the question is, how would you get it delivered? But this is something that U.S. intelligence watches like a hawk, as you can imagine. And at various moments, when the Saudis want to turn up the heat, they keep saying, look, if we think Iran is too close, we're not going to let there be a Shia bomb. We're going to make sure that there's a Sunni alternative.
John, the president has the lowest approval ratings of his presidency. His signature program is now opposed by 61% of the people. Does this have any impact on any of that? I mean, I consider the politics of this the least significant part when we're talking about preventing somebody from getting a nuclear weapon, but politics does play a role here.
Right. Well, as Kennedy
and
used
there is fallout.
Kennedy used to say, politics can get you hurt politically, but in foreign policy it can kill you. So it's more important on foreign policy. It was interesting to see Kevin McCarthy say, well, he would hope that politics didn't get involved. John Cornyn, senator from Texas, very senior senator on the Republican side, said his first reaction on Twitter was, it's amazing what the administration will do to deflect from Obamacare, which gives you some sense of the sort of supercharged nature of this feeding into the original domestic debate over the president's health care plan. The president's approval ratings are low, and on the question of trust, there's been a case in the past where when the president's approval rating has gone very low, like during the 2011 debt ceiling debate, people still trusted the president. That's not the case here. In our poll last September, 60% of the country said they trusted the president. Now only 49% of the country say they trust him. So that makes everything harder for him. The big date to watch, of course, he's got one more week to deliver on this promise that the health care website will work. That's important not only because they need to get people out there and signed up, but also it's another promise and it's another test of his credibility. The White House says it's going to be working as promised in a week. There are not many people outside of the administration who think that's going to be true.
You think that'll happen?
I thought Steny Hoyer, give him credit. He put his finger right on the question that is out there. He said, and Democrats want this to be about claiming that the only problem here is a failure of access to Obamacare. The interesting question increasingly, and it's why you see more Democrats nervous, is that there's beginning to be a fear that in fact Obamacare is the problem, in that is in fact this law working exactly the way it was set up to work? If you're going to cover a lot of uninsured people and people who are sick, the way the mechanics of this works is the only thing you can do is make a lot of people who are healthy and younger and who liked their plans pay a lot more for their health care. So you're going to continue seeing those cancellation notices come in, continue seeing people lose their doctors, and that's even the people who are getting into the exchange. That's what they're finding there.
John, I want to, because we don't have much time left, but to our viewers out there who don't know, John's mother was Nancy Dickerson, who was a very well-known White House correspondent for CBS way back there. And you talked this week about, we're getting ready to talk to Clint Hill, Jackie Kennedy's Secret Service agent. But you talked this week about an amazing dinner that your mother had with the Johnsons the day after they came back to Washington from Dallas.
It was amazing. She'd known Johnson since she worked up on the Hill, so they'd been friends for a while. He'd been watching TV that day in addition to all of his other duties, and he saw her and talking about whether House Speaker Rayburn had supported Johnson ever joining the ticket. And she had said, well, you know, he might have. There was a lot of debate about that at the time. Johnson liked the idea that she said that Rayburn had liked it. Why? Because he wanted nobody to think that there was not a close relationship between Johnson and Kennedy. So he said, come on over. When he got over there...
And this was the day after he got back from Dallas.
The 23rd, his first full day as president. And they arrived late at night, and he was trying to get in touch with the White House, and the phones wouldn't work. And he said, you know, we could be under attack, which he thought might be possible. He thought there was another stage in this, what it might be a kind of a Soviet attack, a coup. He didn't know what. He said we could be under attack, and I couldn't get the Secretary of State on the phone. The next minute, he's on the phone with his speechwriter's daughter, who has got her boyfriend there, and he assures the young man that everything's going to be okay, as if he was comforting the nation kind of one person at a time. He gets off the phone, puts that down, starts talking to the television, worried that they're going to incite riots in the country if they amp up the talk of conspiracy. And so it was just a tumultuous evening in which the president's kind of taking control of his office, but also trying to just kind of figure out the new situation he was in.
He really had this innate sense of command, didn't he? I mean, from the moment he got on that Air Force plane to come back, and when he took the oath, he took charge.
He did, and he was worried about how everything would look in terms of that question of continuity. When the phones didn't work, he said, I want to change that, but I don't want to change anything else. In other words, I don't want to change anything from the Kennedy administration. I want that continuity to be there. I want to be a caretaker of the previous thing. He was always thinking about how it would look, even in a private dinner party of a few people, how it would look, that continuity with the slain president, keeping in mind already that night he was thinking about what his plans would be in 1965 after he'd won re-election in 64. He was thinking a long way out.
All right. Well, listen, thank you all for being with us this morning on this historic weekend. We'll be back in 1 minute. As we conclude our special coverage of the 50th anniversary of the assassination of John Kennedy, we want to go back to what happened exactly 50 years ago today.
This is the basement floor of the Dallas City Hall, and that's a scuffle on the basement floor. It seems to concern photographers.
He has been shot. Oswald has been shot.
Lee Oswald.
Joining us now, Jackie Kennedy's Secret Service agent Clint Hill, author of the new book, 5 Days in November. Mr. Hill, thank you so much for being with us. Well, when that happened, when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald that Sunday, you were already back in Washington because President Johnson, Mrs. Kennedy, all of you had gone back on Air Force One. When you got back to Washington, what did the Secret Service, what was your reaction to hearing that Lee Harvey Oswald had been killed?
Well, we didn't find that out until somewhat later that day, because just as he was being killed, we were in the process of accompanying Mrs. Kennedy and the children and the President, Johnson, taking the President's body up to the U.S. Capitol. So sometime later, and then we were astounded that this had happened because we really wanted to interrogate him. We wanted to find out why. We wanted to see what the motivation was, and we never had that chance.
You know, we now know, especially through the reporting of Phil Sheenan, who has a new book out, that it had been well known that Lee Harvey Oswald had gone to Mexico in the weeks before this had happened. We knew that he had gone to the Soviet embassy there, where he was kind of politely turned away, and he had gone to the Cuban embassy and tried to get a passport or a visa to go to Cuba. And they said, thanks, but no thanks, and sent him on his way. We know from Sheenan's reporting that the CIA and the FBI knew that as he had stormed out of the Cuban embassy, he said, I'm going to kill President Kennedy, as if it was Kennedy's fault he couldn't get a visa to go to Cuba. Did any of you on the President's protective detail know any of that when you came to Dallas?
We had no knowledge of Oswald in any sense. nobody had told us anything about him.
Do you have any idea why? I mean, you must have wondered about that as the years went by, that why this was never passed on. As a matter of fact, it's my understanding that this information was never passed on to the Warren Commission.
Well, I doubt that it was. I had never heard that he had made that statement, but we had a good relationship with the CIA. We had a fairly good relationship with the Bureau. It was a little strained at times, but we didn't receive any information about Oswald whatsoever.
I still find it very hard to believe. And in fact, we now know through the reporting of the Dallas Times-Herald and their publisher at the time, Tom Johnson, who ran across information in the 70s, it was in the 1970s when he found out that the FBI had actually gotten a threatening note from Lee Harvey Oswald, which he had dropped off at their office. He had been offended, as it were, because they had come to check on his wife, who, of course, was a Soviet citizen, and he had defected to the Soviet Union. It seems to me, if you all had known that Oswald had made these statements in Mexico, wouldn't it have changed the way you protected the president?
Certainly. It would have changed everything, because the least thing would have happened, he would have been put under protective surveillance. We would have had somebody watching him all the time. But we had no knowledge that he had any interest in the president whatsoever.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point in America where these various agencies, which do such a great job, will do a better job of sharing what they know and cooperating with one another?
Well, I think it has improved. I think, but even through 2011, up in New York, at that time, the information was not being shared. So it's always been a problem. Hopefully it'll get better.
I want to show you an iconic photo that we all know, and it's what we all remember from the funeral that day, and that is little John standing next to his mom, saluting the flag. There it is. To me, that is the thing that sums it up. But you have quite a story about that.
Well, it just didn't happen out of the blue. I mean, when the casket was brought out and placed on the caisson and all the military out there saluted the president, Mrs. Kennedy leaned over and whispered into John's ear. I wasn't sure exactly what she said, but I saw John throw his shoulders back and salute his father. Well, how that developed was early in November, Mrs. Kennedy came to me and said, the president's going to go to Arlington National Cemetery on November 11th to lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. And all the military are going to salute the president at that time, and I'd like John to go with him and learn how to salute and salute his father. Can you think the agents can teach him that? And I said, sure, that's not a problem. So the agents started work with him day after day, but we had a problem. He would only do it with his left hand. Finally, on that date, November 11th, he came with his father, and he did it properly. But then, from that point on, it was back to the left hand. Then the day of the services at the St. Matthew's Cathedral, he got a little rambunctious. Mrs. Kennedy beckoned to the agents that were working with him, and they took him to a side room. They were trying to keep him busy, so they thought they'd have him practice his salute, and he was right back doing it left-handed. There was a Marine colonel standing at a doorway. He saw what was happening. He walked into the room and he said, John, this is how you salute. And he saluted. And I'll be darned, it stuck. It took that colonel about 15 seconds to teach him what we've been trying to teach him for a month. His work, ours didn't, but that's how he learned how to salute.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
Mr. Hill, you're an American hero. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back in a minute with our Face the Nation flashback. That terrible day in Dallas closed the chapter on the Kennedy presidency and thrust Lyndon Johnson into the Oval Office at a moment of national crisis. That weekend, we came to expect something new from our presidents. We expected them to comfort the nation in time of grief. Lyndon Johnson assumed that role even before Air Force One returned to Washington from Dallas, and he began by trying to console the president's family. That is our Face the Nation flashback.
Well, to the best of my ability.
It's one of the most iconic photographs in American history. Johnson being sworn in aboard Air Force One with Jacqueline Kennedy at his side. After the plane departed Dallas, he called the late president's mother, Rose Kennedy.
Miss Kennedy?
Yes, Mr. President.
I wish to God there was something that I could do, and I wanted to tell you that we were grieving with you.
Thank you very much. I know you love Jack and he loves you.
In the weeks that followed, Johnson reached out to many members of the Kennedy family, but the Kennedy who showed up most often on the new president's call sheet was Jackie. This conversation took place 10 days after the assassination.
Mr. President?
I just wanted you to know you were loved, and by so many and so much.
Oh, Mr.
I'm one of
President.
them. When you haven't got anything else to do, let's take a walk. Let's walk around the backyard, and just let me tell you how much you mean to all of us.
Johnson offered similar words of comfort to the American people. In a Thanksgiving address, he called upon the country to honor Kennedy through forward progress.
All of us have lived through 7 days that none of us will ever forget. We are not given the divine wisdom to answer why this has been, but we are given the human duty of determining what is to be.
But the Kennedy family's well-being still weighed heavily on the president's mind. He called Jackie just before Christmas.
Doing all right?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Thank you.
How's my little girl?
She's fine, and John just set off this awful jet plane. It's the noise you hear in the background.
Well, tell him hello, and I wish all of you a Merry Christmas, and I wish I could do something to make it happier for you.
President Kennedy was
Last Sunday, 50 years later, his daughter Lucy Baines Johnson recalled for us her father's relationship with the Kennedy family.
There's an extraordinary letter that is in the LBJ library from Mrs. Kennedy to my father, and it speaks about other people assessing what that relationship was like. But she says that it must have been difficult for a senator who had actually mentored her young husband to find himself in the position of having to take second place on the ticket. But how grateful he had been, and she remained, for his being willing to do so, because President Kennedy felt that the country needed Lyndon Johnson to serve with the president, and she was so grateful for that, and how much it had meant to her that he had tried to reach out in every way humanly possible after the assassination. And that's what I would hope that country would recall, because it was two people who loved this country with all their heart, trying to do the best as they knew how to. One very young and vibrant and handsome with a small family, another much more seasoned with older children. But together they were trying to leave the world a better place than they found it.
And we'll be right back. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and thanks for watching.